Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
It's good to be here.
Today we are opening a file that I think is going to genuinely unsettle a lot of people. And I don't mean that in a scary movie kind of way,
No, not at all.
but in a way that really challenges how we perceive the structural integrity of our communities, of institutions we often take for granted. We're looking at a phenomenon that, on the surface, sounds like a complete contradiction in terms.
It does. It sounds like a logical impossibility almost. It sits right at this chaotic intersection of psychology, sociology, and what we might call institutional design, or maybe design failure.
Exactly. We are talking about the non-believing preacher,
Right.
the clergy member who stands in the pulpit on Sunday morning, delivers the sermon, leads the prayer, blesses the communion,
Does all the things a pastor is supposed to do.
but privately, internally,
Yeah.
simply does not believe in the supernatural claims of their faith anymore.
And, we should be really precise here. We aren't talking about the occasional doubt. We're not talking about a dark night of the soul, which is a very standard part of the religious experience that many people of faith go through.
Sure, that's almost expected.
This is different. We're talking about a settled cognitive conclusion that the core theology is false.
A conclusion they've reached, not just a feeling.
A conclusion, yes.
Yeah.
And that conclusion is coupled with a professional obligation to act as if it is true every single day.
So before we dive in, I think we really need to set the ground rules, because this is obviously a very sensitive topic.
Extremely.
We are basing this entire deep dive on a fascinating piece of research, the book Caught in the Pulpit, Leaving Belief Behind.
And it's by the philosopher and cognitive scientist Daniel C. Dennett and the clinical social worker Linda LaScola.
Right. And because of who the authors are, specifically Dennett, who was a giant in the field of atheism and consciousness studies,
A very public intellectual.
people might assume this is a hit piece.
Mhm.
They might think we're here to debate whether God exists or, just to bash religion.
And that is exactly what we are not doing today.
Absolutely not. This isn't a theological debate. We aren't here to decide if the resurrection happened or if the Red Sea parted.
Correct. And frankly, we aren't even here to make a moral judgment on these specific individuals. We're not here to call them liars or hypocrites.
That's the easy, kind of lazy takeaway.
It is, and it misses the whole point.
This is the key pivot for this entire deep dive. We're looking at this through a systems frame. That's what hooked me on the source material in the first place.
Me too.
Dennett and LaScola treat the church not just as a spiritual body, but as an information system. Almost like a biological organism or a corporate structure with its own rules.
Exactly. So the central question isn't, why is this person lying? That's too small. It's too individualistic.
It puts all the blame on the person.
Right. The real systems question is, how does a system designed to propagate faith inadvertently trap its own leaders in a state of sustained pretense?
It's an institutional design flaw, a bug in the code.
That's it. We're looking at structure, we're looking at incentives, feedback loops, and persistence, not just individual intention.
Okay, so we have the book, Caught in the Pulpit. Give us the scope here. Are we talking about, just a couple of disgruntled guys they found?
Oh, far from it. This started as a pilot study back in 2010 where they interviewed 5 pastors, and they realized they'd stumbled on something much bigger.
So the book expands on that.
Significantly, they conducted these really in-depth confidential interviews with about 35 participants. And the cross-section is crucial here. This isn't just one flavor of church.
Yeah.
You have liberal denominations like Methodists or Episcopalians. You have literalist fundamentalists like Southern Baptists. You have current pastors who are still in the pulpit and former pastors who've gotten out.
And this is the one that really gets me, seminary professors.
That's the part that blew my mind too.
The idea that this unbelief goes all the way up the chain of command to the people who are actually teaching theology to the next generation of pastors.
It just screams that the issue is systemic, right? It's not a few isolated cases.
It's a feature, not a bug.
It might be. But to really understand the trap, we have to start at the beginning. We have to understand the bait. We need to look at the input to this system. Who are these people who get caught?
Right. Because I think the cynical view, the immediate stereotype, is the wolf in sheep's clothing.
The infiltrator.
Yeah, the secret atheist who decides to put on a collar just to destroy the church from the inside, or, maybe just to grift a steady salary.
That is the common assumption, especially in religious circles when this topic comes up. It's a defense mechanism, in a way. This couldn't be one of us.
But the data just doesn't bear that out.
Not at all. The data shows the exact opposite. These are not infiltrators. The profile of the person who enters the ministry is almost universally someone with the best of motives and intentions.
So they start as true believers.
Oh, absolutists, often. Gung-ho. They're usually young, they are highly idealistic, and they are genuinely seeking a life of service.
They want to make a difference.
They want community, they want meaning, and they view the ministry not just as a job, but as a lifelong vocation, calling.
They believe the message.
They believe it with their whole heart. They want to help people. They go in with their eyes wide open, or so they think, believing fully. They're often the A students of their Sunday school class, the ones everyone pointed to and said, that kid's going to be a pastor someday.
Okay, so that's the input.
Yeah.
You have a young, idealistic, true believer entering the system. Where does the glitch happen? If they go in so full of faith, what is it that turns the tide?
Well, for many of them, the first crack in the foundation doesn't happen when they're in the pulpit. It happens in the classroom. We need to talk about what the book calls the seminary glitch.
I have to admit, I've always assumed seminary was just, more Sunday school, but harder.
Right.
You memorize more Bible verses, you learn some Greek, you learn how to write a sermon.
That is what so many of them expect. They think it's going to be a kind of spiritual boot camp, a place to forge their faith into something stronger.
But the reality is,
for many, it's a profound shock to the system. There is a massive disconnect, a huge information gap between what we can call Sunday school faith and a formal seminary education.
okay, define Sunday school faith for us in this context.
Sunday school faith is the faith of the pew. It's often simple, it's literal, and it's largely unquestioning.
Adam and Eve were real people in a real garden.
Moses wrote the Pentateuch. Jesus said everything you see in the red letters in your Bible. It's a devotional relationship with the text. It's about comfort and certainty and personal connection.
Okay, and seminary is?
Seminary is academic. It's critical. Especially in the mainline or more liberal seminaries, they teach something called historical criticism.
Which sounds intimidating.
It's basically the scientific study of ancient texts. It's treating the Bible like any other historical document. So they teach the Jesus of history versus the Christ of faith.
What's the difference there?
The Jesus of history is what scholars can, reasonably reconstruct about the actual man who lived in first century Palestine. The Christ of faith is the theological figure who was resurrected and sits at the right hand of God. Seminary teaches you to see the gap between the two.
And they teach that the Bible wasn't just zapped down from heaven.
Exactly. They teach that it was a compilation of texts put together by human beings, edited by committees, and shaped by very real political processes over centuries.
It sounds like they're deconstructing the sausage while you're trying to enjoy your breakfast.
That's a perfect way to put it. Let's look at a specific example from the source material because this makes it really clear. There's the story of Queen Esther.
Right, from the book of Esther in the Old Testament. Heroine of the Jewish people.
Correct. So there was a professor in the study, they call her Beatrice. She's tenured, she's brilliant, and she teaches the book of Esther.
Okay.
Now, in the academic world of biblical scholarship, it's almost universally agreed upon, historically speaking, that Queen Esther probably never existed. The book is considered a novella. It's a piece of historical fiction that was likely written to explain the origin of the Jewish holiday of Purim. It's powerful literature, it's theologically rich, but it's not history.
Okay, so the professor knows this. It's basic for her.
The professor knows this. She lives in the ivory tower. She can teach her students, look, this didn't literally happen, but here is the theological value of the story. Here's what it tells us about courage and identity. She has constructed a sophisticated faith that doesn't require literal history to function.
But the student who's fresh out of Sunday school.
The student is often devastated, absolutely shattered. Beatrice talks about a young woman in her class whose whole world broke down when she learned Esther wasn't a real historical figure.
Because if that's not true, what else isn't true?
Exactly. Her faith was built like a Jenga tower. If one brick is false, the whole thing falls.
So the seminary itself breaks the literalism that many students come in with. But isn't that the point of higher education? To learn the truth, even if it's uncomfortable.
Ideally, yes. But here is the critical glitch in the system's design. The professors teach these future clergy to view the text metaphorically or scholarly or poetically. But, and this is the absolute core of the flaw, They do not teach the students how to translate that complex, nuanced view to a congregation that expects and demands literal certainty.
It's a massive information asymmetry. The pulpit knows things that the pew does not.
And the system implicitly relies on that asymmetry to function. Think about it. The professor has job security. She has tenure. The student is about to go out and get a job where their paycheck depends entirely on the congregation liking what they say.
And that congregation hasn't been to seminary.
Not at all. So if that student goes to their first job interview at say, a conservative church and says, well, actually, Queen Esther is a fictional character, but let's talk about her literary significance, they aren't getting hired, period.
So the seminary equips them with knowledge that actually makes them unemployable if they're honest about it.
Precisely. It hands them a tool set that dismantles the very product they're supposed to sell. They are taught to be scholars in the morning and expected to be simple, literal believers in the evening.
Okay, that's the liberal side, which is fascinating. What about the conservative seminaries? Surely they aren't teaching that the Bible is fiction.
No, of course not. But they have their own, perhaps more insidious version of the trap. The source calls it the game of chicken.
A hazing ritual. That sounds ominous.
It is, in a way. They will present these challenging facts. Clear contradictions in the Gospels, historical inaccuracies, the philosophical problem of evil.
So they don't hide from them.
They don't hide from them, but instead of exploring them openly and honestly, they frame them as a test of spiritual fortitude.
A test of faith.
Yes. The implicit and sometimes explicit attitude is, if these facts shake your faith, then your faith wasn't strong enough to begin with. The problem isn't the facts. The problem is you.
Wow. That is incredibly manipulative. It frames critical thinking as a moral failing.
It does. It creates a powerful feedback loop where you learn to repress your doubt, to prove your worthiness. You learn the apologetics, the intricate, sometimes pretzel logic explanations for why the contradictions aren't really contradictions.
Just go to the approved answer.
You learn the script. So either way, whether liberal or conservative, the seeds of doubt are actually planted by the institution's own educational requirements. They require you to stare at the cracks in the dam, but they forbid you from acknowledging the water that's leaking through.
Okay, so let's move down the timeline a bit. You have these young pastors. They've graduated. They have this secret knowledge, or at least these suppressed questions rattling around in their head. Now they're in the job. They're ordained. They're leading a church. And this is where Dennett's systems view gets really, really interesting. He uses a biological analogy to explain how the church protects itself.
This is the concept of the membrane.
Break that down for us. What is the membrane?
So Dennett suggests that religions, and many social institutions really, act like cells or living organisms. And to survive, any cell needs a semi-permeable membrane.
Right, from high school biology.
Exactly. It needs to keep the good stuff, the dogma, the community, the funding, the shared belief inside. And it has to keep the toxins, heresy, doubt, contradictory evidence from science outside.
It has to maintain its internal environment.
It has to. And the clergy, in this analogy, are the immune system, or more specifically, they are the monitors on that membrane.
They're the gatekeepers.
They're the gatekeepers. It is their job to decide what information gets in and what gets filtered out. So to do their job effectively, they have to handle the toxins. They have to read the atheist books, watch the critical movies, and understand the cultural arguments so they can refute them for the flock.
But that's the hazard, isn't it? By handling the toxins day in and day out, they risk getting infected themselves.
Precisely. That is the occupational hazard. If you are a conscientious pastor, you feel an obligation to read the New Atheists. You have to read Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris so you can stand up on Sunday and tell your congregation why those guys are wrong.
You have to know the enemy to defeat the enemy.
Right. But what happens when you're reading Hitchens's critique of the Old Testament and you think, actually, that point about the morality of the Exodus makes a lot of sense? Or you read Dawkins on evolution and realize, wait, the scientific evidence for this is actually overwhelming and beautiful?
The filter starts to fail.
Filter fails because the monitor got persuaded. And the study even mentioned pop culture playing a role here, which I found fascinating. It's not always a dense philosophical text.
The pastor's watching South Park?
It was. There was a Catholic priest in the study, they call him Glenn. And he was really struck by a South Park episode that satirized Catholicism. And it wasn't a dry academic argument that got to him. It was the humor. It was the satire.
It just laid the absurdity bare.
Sometimes pop culture can pierce that membrane more effectively than a textbook because it reframes the belief system in a way that makes its oddities impossible to ignore.
So the monitor becomes persuaded by the very things they are supposed to be filtering out for everyone else. The immune system has turned on the body.
And suddenly, the pastor is the one carrying the virus of doubt. And because they are the leader, the public face of the institution, they are the one person who absolutely cannot show any symptoms.
Okay, so now you're a pastor.
Yeah.
You've been infected. You've been persuaded. You don't believe anymore. The logical next step seems really obvious to an outsider like me.
Yeah.
Why not just say it?
Just quit.
Yeah, why not just raise your hand at the next church board meeting and say, hey guys, programming note. I think we might be wrong about this whole God thing.
That brings us to the second major mechanism of the trap, what the book describes as the don't ask, don't tell protocol.
I usually associate that phrase with the military, but it applies to church leadership.
Oh, it is deeply embedded in the professional culture of the clergy. There is a powerful, unspoken taboo against asking your colleagues pointed questions about their specific personal beliefs.
You just don't do it.
You don't ask another pastor, hey, Bob, do you literally believe in the virgin birth? Or how do you really square the flood story with, geology?
Why not? What's the fear?
It's considered incredibly rude. It's aggressive. It's seen as questioning their integrity, their calling. It's like asking a coworker how much money they make or about their sex life. It's just not done.
So the assumption is, if you are wearing the collar, you must believe. End of story.
The uniform is the proof. And this social politeness, this go-along-to-get-along culture, acts as a powerful structural reinforcement for silence.
Because if nobody ever asks you the direct question,
You never have to tell a direct lie. You just omit. You just nod along. You use vague language. But it creates this profound and terrible isolation.
I can't even imagine.
These clergy have almost no safe space, to be honest. They can't talk to their congregation, obviously. That would cause a catastrophe.
You'd be fired on the spot.
Instantly. And you can't talk to your bishop or your denominational superiors because they'll defrock you. And in many cases, they can't even talk to their spouses.
That's the one that's really hard to hear.
The spouse is often a truer believer than the pastor ever was, and their entire social life is also wrapped up in the church. Disclosing your unbelief could mean the end of your marriage on top of everything else.
That isolation sounds completely suffocating. But let's talk about the thing that really bolts the door shut. The golden handcuffs. Because I think a lot of listeners are still thinking, okay, it's awkward, it's lonely, but just quit. Go get another job, be a consultant, do something else.
And that is where the brutal, cold, hard economic reality hits. The trap is not just psychological, it's a financial and social lock-in.
Let's start with the financial part.
We have to look at the total compensation package for a pastor. It's not just a salary, which is often quite modest. In many denominations, it includes housing, the personage, or the mats.
Right, the church owns the house you live in. So if you lose your job...
You literally lose the roof over your family's head immediately.
How quickly?
The contracts usually say within 30 days. You are out on the street. And then you have what the book calls the specialization trap.
The skills gap.
A massive one. The book uses this great comparison, the lumberjack versus the priest.
I loved this analogy. Walk us through it.
Okay. Imagine a lumberjack. If he's having a bad day, or he feels like he's losing his edge, or he's just not feeling it, what can he do?
He can, I don't know, sharpen his axe, work out.
He can try harder. He can work on his technique. He can lift weights. The input, his physical effort, directly correlates to the output, which is chopping down trees.
Right. It's physical, it's tangible, it's under his control.
But a priest cannot will belief. Belief is not a muscle you can just decide to exercise harder. You cannot force your brain to believe something you have already concluded is false.
You can't just try harder to believe in the resurrection.
You can't sharpen your axe to make the virgin birth seem more plausible once that logical framework has fallen apart for you. The will has no power over it.
And the lumberjack also has transferable skills. He knows how to work with his hands. He can probably go work in construction or landscaping.
Exactly. Now look at the pastor's resume. A Master of Divinity degree, an MDiv, has notoriously limited transferability to the secular job market.
It's a very specific degree.
Very. So if you are 50 years old and all you have done for 30 years is preach sermons, visit the sick, and counsel parishioners on spiritual matters,
Right.
what's your pivot? What do you put on your LinkedIn profile?
Maybe. An HR manager. A nonprofit director.
Maybe. But you're competing against 25-year-olds with actual HR degrees and relevant internships. You're effectively starting over at an entry-level salary in your 50s.
And you have a family to support. You have kids in college. You have a mortgage to think about. Oh, wait.
You don't have a mortgage. Because you have no equity. You've been living in church housing for 20 or 30 years. You have no savings built up in a home. It is a terrifying financial cliff. The system is designed, intentionally or not, to make leaving economically irrational.
And it's not just the money. The book talks about social death.
This is arguably worse than the poverty for many of them.
Right.
For a pastor, their entire social network is the church.
It's company town.
It's a total institution. Their best friends, their tennis partners, their children's playmates, it's all tied to the congregation. They are the center of that community.
And their spouse is just as embedded.
Often more so. The pastor's wife or husband often has a role that is just as public and just as scrutinized. They lead the women's group or run the bake sale. Their identity is completely fused with the church.
So leaving the faith doesn't just mean changing careers. It means blowing up your entire life. It means your spouse loses all their friends. Your kids lose their youth group and get labeled as apostates. You lose your standing, your identity, your entire community all at once.
It is a form of exile, a self-imposed shunning. So when you stack up those incentives, financial ruin, homelessness, social exile, divorce, you start to understand why the system is so stable. You understand why someone would stay even if they think the theology is complete nonsense. The cost of authenticity is just too high.
So they stay. They're trapped. But how do they do it? I mean, psychologically, how do you get up there every Sunday and say things you don't believe without going completely crazy? The study identifies some adaptive strategies. This feels like the psychological core of the deep dive.
It is. And the primary tool, the most common one, is compartmentalization.
Splitting the brain.
Essentially, yes, a separation of duties. They learn to frame their public role as a performance rather than a confession.
Ah, that's a key distinction.
A huge one. When they put on the collar or the vestments or the robe, they are consciously entering a role. It's like an actor stepping onto a stage to play Hamlet.
The actor doesn't have to believe he is actually a Danish prince whose uncle murdered his father. He just has to say the lines convincingly.
Exactly. They tell themselves, I am not lying. I am reciting the liturgy. This is what the institution requires of me. This is the script. This is our shared tradition.
And I'm sure they rationalize it by focusing on all the good they do, right? I'm helping people, so does the theology really matter?
That is the number one justification. They pivot to social work. They focus on the horizontal, not the vertical.
What do you mean by that?
They focus on person-to-person good, community building, counseling people through grief, visiting the sick, running the food pantry, fighting for social justice. They tell themselves the theology is just the ancient wrapper. The real content is the kindness, the community.
And to be fair, they're doing a lot of good work.
They are. That's the tragic complexity of it. These aren't villains cackling in the back room. They are, in many ways, trapped helpers. They're doing the right things for, in their private view, the wrong ultimate reasons.
But they still have to preach the sermon. They still have to read the Bible verses and say something about them. How do they handle the actual words?
This is where it gets really tricky. This is linguistic adaptation. And Dennett and LaScola distinguish between two main strategies here, and it usually breaks down along denominational lines: the liberal strategy and the literal strategy.
Okay, let's start with the liberals. This feels like it would be the easier path.
It is structurally easier, absolutely. The liberal strategy is all about the power of metaphor. It's what the book calls the redefinition game.
Okay, how does that game work?
It's about using the traditional words, but with a completely different internal dictionary. So when a liberal, non-believing pastor says the word God, they might not mean a conscious supernatural being in the sky with a beard.
What do they mean?
They might mean love, or community, or the ground of all being, or the creative force of the universe, or ultimate reality.
So they are using the same vocabulary as the congregation, but they've swapped out all the definitions.
Correct. And this creates a new kind of information asymmetry, a new disconnect. The pastor stands up on Easter and says, "Today we celebrate the resurrection."
No.
In their head, they mean, we celebrate the symbolic spiritual renewal of springtime and the psychological triumph of hope over despair. It's a beautiful poetic idea.
But the person in the third pew, Mrs. McGillicuddy, she hears.
She hears Jesus physically got up and walked out of the tomb, bluntly, zombie Jesus. She hears the literal supernatural event.
And the pastor knows that's what she's hearing.
The pastor knows, and that's the ethical dilemma. Is this sophisticated theology, or is it just lying? The pastor feels clever. They feel they are translating the ancient myth for modern times in a way that preserves the institution.
But they're essentially exploiting the ambiguity of language to maintain their position. They're letting the listener deceive themselves.
It's like a magician who lets the audience believe it's real magic when they know perfectly well it's just sleight of hand. And in the study, some of the liberal pastors admit that this really wears on them. They realize they're playing a word game that their parishioners aren't in on.
Okay, now what about the conservatives? The literals. They can't get away with God is a metaphor for love. You can't be a Southern Baptist and say the resurrection is just the feeling of spring.
No, you absolutely cannot. They face a much, much harder binary. They have to engage in what Dennett coins creedal athleticism.
That is a fantastic term, creedal athleticism.
Isn't it great? It refers to the vigorous, costly public signaling of belief. Because their environment demands strict literalism, they have to assert the miracles even harder than everyone else. They have to perform their belief.
It's a performance of strength. Like a bodybuilder showing off their muscles, they have to show off their faith muscles.
Exactly. I believe the Earth is 6,000 years old, despite all the scientific evidence. That's not a statement of fact. It's a statement of loyalty. It proves you're part of the in-group.
The more impossible the belief, the stronger the signal of commitment.
Precisely. But this makes their system very, very brittle. When a liberal pastor loses their faith, they can kind of slide into this fuzzy metaphorical language. When a literal pastor breaks, they break hard. It's a snap, not a slow bend. They go from true believer to atheist, often overnight, because the system they're in allows for absolutely no middle ground.
Which brings us to the personal toll this all takes. You would think the result of all this faking and performing and loneliness would be classic burnout.
And that was one of the most counterintuitive findings of the study for me. We hear so much about clergy burnout in general, but the study suggests that for these non-believers, the burnout is not caused by the loss of belief itself.
Really? Because losing your entire worldview, your religion, that sounds like an incredibly heavy emotional burden. It's an existential crisis.
It is, and they go through that, but many of them actually reported feeling liberated, energized.
Liberated from what?
From the cognitive dissonance. When they finally admitted to themselves, I don't believe this anymore, it was a relief. They felt they could finally embrace science and reason and the raw beauty of the natural world without having to constantly twist it to fit a pre-approved dogma. The burnout wasn't from the lack of God.
So what was the real stressor then?
Intellectual loneliness.
Explain that. What does that feel like?
Imagine you have just discovered the most amazing, awe-inspiring things about how the universe actually works. You're reading about evolution, cosmology, astrophysics, human psychology. You are absolutely thrilled by reality.
You're excited. You want to tell people.
You're bursting with it. But you are the leader of a community where you cannot share any of it. In fact, you have to get up every week and actively argue against it.
You have to keep pretending that the older, magic version of the world is the true one.
You are surrounded by people you genuinely care about, but you can't tell them what you are actually thinking about the biggest questions in life. It's the inability to be your authentic intellectual self with your own tribe.
The book calls it actor's fatigue.
Yes. The exhaustion comes from the constant maintenance of the facade, the constant self-editing, and the crushing loneliness of being the only one in the room who knows the truth, or at least what you've concluded is the truth. They describe a profound sense of isolation, even while being the center of communal attention.
And this whole fragile system brings us to the modern era. Because keeping that secret, keeping that institutional membrane intact, is getting harder and harder.
So much harder.
We have to talk about the great environmental stressor, the information age.
This is the game changer. This is the external pressure that might just crack the whole system. For centuries, the church could control information. If you lived in a medieval village or even a 1950s small town, the priest or pastor was likely the most educated person you knew.
He had the books, he had the training, he told you what was true.
His word was authoritative. Now, a teenager sitting in the back pew has a smartphone with access to all of human knowledge in their pocket.
They can fact-check this sermon in real time.
In real time. They can look up the historical context of a Bible verse. They can find scientific data that contradicts the sermon. They can watch videos from other worldviews. The transparency crisis means the membrane is failing. You can't filter the toxins anymore because they're everywhere.
It's a knowledge arms race.
That is exactly how the authors describe it, and the institution has to decide how to react. Do we adapt and become more metaphorical, more liberal, which risks losing the diehards who crave certainty? Or do we insulate further, double down on the dogma, and become more cult-like and closed off from the world.
It's a strategic dilemma. I thought the example of the Book of Mormon musical was fascinating in this context. It's not just about information, but about shared information.
Yes, it is a perfect illustration of a key concept from game theory called mutual knowledge.
Okay, break that down for us. Mutual knowledge.
It's not just about you personally knowing a fact. It's about you knowing that everyone else knows it too, and that they know that you know.
So before the internet, if you had a doubt about your faith, you might think you were the only one in your town.
You'd feel like a freak. You'd keep quiet.
But now,
Now you know that millions of people share that doubt, and the Book of Mormon musical is a massive pop culture phenomenon that publicly, hilariously satirizes the foundational beliefs of the LDS Church. It's huge. It won a ton of Tony Awards.
it's mainstream.
So the LDS Church realized they couldn't just ignore it or condemn it from the pulpit. Everyone knew it existed. Everyone knew what the jokes were about. The cat was out of the bag.
So what did they do?
They bought ads in the playbill for the show.
Right. You've seen the play, now read the book.
Exactly. It was a brilliant but also telling move. It was a concession, an admission that they can no longer control the narrative or silence criticism. They have to engage with it in the open marketplace of ideas. The old stage magic of the priesthood doesn't work when everyone in the audience knows how the trick is done.
And for the closeted pastor, this just ratchets up the pressure. The congregation knows more, they're asking harder questions, so the pastor has to work harder to maintain the illusion or work harder to redefine everything.
It's exhausting.
So the system is under intense pressure from the outside, and it's trapping these very real people on the inside.
I want to put some faces to this now. The book gives us these generalized case studies, and they are just heartbreaking.
They really are. These are real human beings stuck in an impossible situation. Let's talk about Jack. Jack represents the trapped pastor.
Jack is the one who is just waiting it out.
He perfectly represents the tragedy of the sunk cost fallacy. He wants to leave. He's known for years that it's not true for him anymore. But he needs the salary. More importantly, he needs the pension. He is literally just counting down the days until he can retire without losing everything.
So his life is on hold.
Completely. He feels the toxicity of the church politics. He feels the deep falseness of his position every single day, but he is economically paralyzed. He is just trying to survive until he hits 65.
That sounds like a prison sentence. But then you have a different type. You have Wes and Andy. They represent the shepherd model. This is a strategy that's more common among the liberals. They also know it's not literally true, but they stay not just for the money, but because they feel a deep sense of responsibility to their flock.
So they see themselves as guides.
They view their role as slowly, gently weaning the congregation off of what they see as superstition.
Look, I know the truth, and I'm going to guide you toward it, but we have to take baby steps so I don't spook the herd.
Exactly. They want to move their community toward a more modern, humanistic framework. They want to emphasize the ethical teachings, love your neighbor, feed the poor, fight for justice, and quietly downplay the supernatural claims. They see themselves as protectors, guiding people out of the dark into the light of reason.
That's a fascinating rationalization. Is that noble or is it incredibly patronizing?
That is the debate, isn't it? They would certainly see it as noble, but critics would say it's unbelievably patronizing to decide, I can handle the truth, but these simple people in the pews cannot. It maintains the old hierarchy of the enlightened leader and the ignorant flock.
And then there's my favorite, Bill, the ritualist.
Bill is fascinating because he finds profound comfort and meaning in the liturgy itself, in the ritual. He'll be the first to tell you he doesn't believe there's a literal God listening to the prayers.
But he loves the prayers.
He believes the act of praying, the poetry of the ancient language, the God language, has immense psychological and communal value. He separates the referent from the symbol. He loves the beauty of the symbol, even if he believes the referent is an empty box.
It's like loving the music and ceremony of an opera, even if you know the story isn't real.
Precisely. For him, the ritual provides order, beauty, and comfort in a chaotic world, and he feels he can provide that experience to others without needing to believe in the literal magic behind it. He's what you might call a cultural Christian, not a theological one.
But for the longest time, all of these people, Jack the Trapped, Wes the Shepherd, Bill the Ritualist, they all thought they were completely alone. They thought they were the only bad apples.
And that is the final piece of this whole puzzle, the emergence of a release valve for the system, a new element that disrupts the trap, the Clergy Project.
And this was founded by the authors of the book, right? along with some other big names like Richard Dawkins and Dan Barker.
Yes, it came about directly because of their pilot study. They interviewed those first 5 pastors and realized these people were desperate for a safe place to talk, so they created one.
And it's an online community.
It's a confidential, private online community. At the time the book was published, it had over 500 members. Today, I believe it's over 1,000. It's exclusively for closeted, non-believing clergy and for former clergy.
And what does it actually do for them, practically speaking?
It breaks the isolation. That is the single most important function. It proves to each new member, you are not crazy and you are not alone.
Just knowing there are hundreds of others in the exact same boat.
It changes everything. Remember, the system's stability relies on the isolation of the doubter. If you think you are the only one, you stay silent. You think the problem is with you.
But when you log on and realize there's a whole community of you.
People from your own denomination, people you might even know by reputation, the fear begins to dissipate. It disrupts the system's ability to control the narrative that doubt is a personal, moral failing.
It's like a support group for spies who want to come in from the cold.
Or a secret union for workers who realize the factory is fundamentally unsafe. It allows them to share strategies for leaving, to find emotional support, to get practical advice, and sometimes just to vent to people who truly understand. It creates a counter system to the official church system.
Okay, so we've looked at the input, the design of the trap, the psychological coping mechanisms, and now the cracks that are forming in the system. When you zoom all the way out, what does this tell us about the future of these institutions?
Well, if we synthesize this system's view, what we're really looking at is a critical design flaw in the social cell of many religious organizations.
A flaw that's being exposed by modernity.
Yes. The structure of the job itself, making a specific internal belief state a non-negotiable condition of employment, creates the inevitability of the closeted non-believer.
As long as you pay people to believe something, some of them are eventually going to fake it, especially if they have no other options.
Especially when the cost of authenticity is total ruin, the persistence of this entire system has relied on informational asymmetry, the simple fact that the pew doesn't know what the pulpit knows from seminary.
But as we said, that asymmetry is vanishing.
It's gone. And Dennett makes a pretty bold prediction about this in the book.
He does. It's a striking line.
He predicts that religion will change more in the next 20 years than it has in the last 2,000.
Wow. And why?
Because of transparency. The membrane of deceit, as he might call it, is thinning to the point of breaking. The stage magic is being revealed. You simply cannot run a large-scale system based on mystery and privileged information in an age of total information access.
It feels like we're watching a slow-motion collapse, or at the very least, a radical, painful transformation.
It forces the ultimate question. If the leaders themselves don't believe in the supernatural claims, what is the institution actually for? If it's just a community center with nice songs and ethical teachings, does it need all the dogma? But if it needs the dogma to maintain its identity and funding, how does it handle leaders who know the dogma is flawed?
It is a crisis in perception indeed.
And here is a final provocative thought for you to chew on. We often look at these non-believing clergy as the glitch in the system, the anomaly, the failure.
Right, the ones who fell away, the ones who lost their faith.
But what if we reframe it? What if we view religion not as a static divine mandate, but as a human institution that has to evolve to survive?
Yeah.
If we take that view, what if these non-believing clergy are not the glitch? What if they are the miner's canaries?
Signaling that the air is toxic. Signaling the future.
Exactly. What happens when the leaders of the institution have cognitively evolved past the core beliefs of the institution itself? They might be the first indicators of where the faith is actually going in a secularizing world. Maybe they aren't falling behind. Maybe they are way out ahead of the curve. And the pain and loneliness they feel is the terrible tension of an institution that hasn't caught up to its own inevitable reality.
That is the thought that is going to stick with me. We tend to judge the one who leaves the herd, but maybe they're just the first one to spot the cliff.
Precisely.
We want to give a huge credit to Daniel C. Dennett and Linda LaScola for their incredible, groundbreaking work. The book is Caught in the Pulpit, Leaving Belief Behind. It is a fascinating, empathetic, and rigorous look at a world that is hidden in plain sight.
Highly recommended. It will absolutely change the way you look at the person standing at the front of the room, regardless of your own beliefs.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to this deep dive. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
And for a shorter visual overview of this topic, you can check out the mini explainer we've linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and maybe comment with other books or topics you'd like us to explore next. As always, stay curious.
And keep asking questions.